And we're live. Hell yizzle, y'all. Halle Berry, hallelujah. What's going on? I'm going to give everybody a chance to filter in accordingly, but I already see a few names. Austin Bonnell, what is up, man? I appreciate it. Long days and pleasant nights to you as well. Zach King, yo, yo, yo. How am I doing on this fine day? Well, I'm just glad that election bickering here in the U.S. is over, regardless of what your personal political affiliation is. I'm a registered independent, so I don't choose sides in that shizzle. But yeah, I'm just ready to move on to holidays and kicking ass creatively the rest of the year. So yeah, I am very excited about this. As per usual, I did both a read and a listen, and I actually hadn't reread Salem's Lot in maybe like 4 or 5 years, I want to say. So I had just rewatched the miniseries, both of them. And so, yeah, I'm going to just give it a couple of minutes. Once we're in double digits, I'll probably just get it rocking. But there are notes, many page of notes, lots of stuff. This is a dense book, and it really, though I'll get into it here, momentarily, but it really laid the groundwork for stories like, It and Under the Dome and various others with these large casts of characters and stuff. Andrew, my man, what is up, good sir? I'm glad that you enjoyed a reread of this. This is a book that Andrew Thompson champions all the goddamn time. So, okay, we've got Jens Lindgren. Hello, Fuego. I love your King content. I appreciate the hell out of that, y'all. And I'm rocking this new shirt, this Hail to Stephen King of the Hill. So, although the fact that they made him look more like Dale, poor Stevie K there. But anyway, and my dude Robert Duell, what is up? I'm very excited for some filming and proper collabor with him and the rest of the Horror Show gang tomorrow. It appears we're getting the girls together for filming tomorrow, guys, so that's pretty exciting. But yes, right for a shorter novel, he packs a lot of story into it. Yeah, seriously, for like 400, 430, 439, something like that. There, it's dense, and it's really interestingly observational is what I would definitely say. So I'm going to jump on and share this link real quick on the respective social media stuff and let a couple more peeps filter in. And yeah, if you're in that like of this video as we're going through the course of it means a hell of a lot. It does help with those analytical things. And yeah, but more importantly than anything else, thanks to everybody who is going to be jumping in and joining for what I'm very excited to discuss. So we are at 11. This one goes to 11. And just got to jump down for the share action. But I hope everybody is having a most rad status start to their weekend. Maybe have some plans to read some Sai King, watch some Sai King, or, horror. Just hopefully you're indulging and appreciating something as far as creative expression goes, because that's how I like to spend my long days and pleasant nights. So get this link thing out. If this iPhone would comply accordingly, which is always fun. Okay, live palaver. All about Salem's Lot. That's right. Hell of a book, man. I'm still kind of shocked that it's 45 years old. If that doesn't make anybody else feel respectably old, I don't know. I don't know what else could if you're a constant reader. So, and select all. Come on, yo. Okay, copy. Just take a quick minute throwing this into the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group, and then we will get things rock-a-lockin', everybody, because I've got the band coming over, and we're gonna do some jamming, possible recording. Very excited about that. And if you guys haven't had the chance to check out my band Chiron's cover of Civil War, it's basically Civil War 2020 with our new vocalist, and she put a nice spin, in my estimation, on the Guns N' Roses classic. Brought a little sass, a little twang to the proceedings, and so yeah, I'll link to that in if you're watching this after the fact. But Chiron Band AZ on Facebook, that's where you can find that video. That is going to be my only self-promotion besides L Rate today. And okay, so there is the link, and we got 12 peeps in. I know a lot of people probably have their eyes on all kinds of other craziness, at least if you're here in the States, but I am glad that presumably that stuff is in the back burner. So, okay, back to the live chat, and who else we got? Christina Dover is here. What is up? Okay, who else we got? Zach King saying this was the only Sai King book besides it to truly freak me out. Yeah, there are a couple just very cinematic passages that I'm very much looking forward to. And obviously, if you guys have favorite parts of the book, whether it's lines or beats or whatever, I'm going to be reading a few selections from this book. And yeah, we got 15 now. I found the first pressing paperback at the used bookstore for $2. Hell yeah, that's a score, Austin. Righteous, man. Okay, Nap019. Haha. Love the number, yo. What is up to you as well? And it's timeless for the most part. I totally agree with you, Andrew. So I think it's about time, everybody. I'm just going to take a sip of my specialty coffee here. And we will get this shipped properly. Rock-a-lockin'. Okay. Let's just get this live first. There you go. All right. Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime in Fuego. And if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stable King. Yeah, that's right. And obviously, Bienvenidos, welcome to the Horror Show. So stoked to have you here on a spooktacular Saturday, the weekly worship for El Rey, my favorite author, as I so affectionately call him, because you see all those books behind me that Juan Martinez in the the Facebook group recently, he's like, dude, you shouldn't stack your books like that. It messes with the spines. Goddamn do I know. And I'm in the market for a new, bigger bookshelf for, trying to build this new set for episode 250. This is either 240, 241, something like that. We are creeping up on it. We are creeping on a come up, if I'm going to use that rap reference. And yeah, guys, that is a discussion for another day and a reveal for sometime in early 2021. But can you believe this mofo is 45 years old? Yes, I'm obviously showing off the Cemetery Dance release. This is the second in their double-day years, which has encompassed Carrie, Salem's Lot, and The Shining thus far. I love Blue and the rest of the peeps over at Cemetery Dance, but they had some printing press problems, so unfortunately I'm still waiting on Night Shift, which is the next one, and I've already pre-ordered the stand, so very stoked to be getting those at some particular point. But I used to have the illustrated edition of this, which had like the black and white photographs and stuff. It combined Jerusalem's Lot, which is kind of a pseudo-prequel-ish sort of thing, and then also One for the Road, which is kind of a little spin-off sequel aftermath, because there is an epilogue in this book, so I wouldn't necessarily call it an epilogue. But yeah, that was the definitive edition, especially with like the additional, like deleted pages and stuff like that, until this mofo came out. And this has a new foreword by King that they brought over from the illustrated edition, but it's got a few interesting essays in the back, including Clyde Barker talking about the book. King sang his praises for so long, and then lo and behold, he's actually singing some of his own to the King, which is pretty dope. And there's illustrations in here, which I have marked. Glenn Chadbourne, I believe, did these once again, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, this is a hell of an edition. I believe it's long out of print, unfortunately. But more so than anything else, this is a book that as I said before we started the show proper, I hadn't read this in maybe 4 or 5 years. I had revisited the miniseries for a review, the original Toby Hooper one, and I had also done a Films That Forgot the Face of Their Father installment of the 2004 miniseries that had James Cromwell, Rob Lowe, and Rutger Hauer, I want to say, as well. And I also did a review of The Return to Salem's Lot, which was, Larry Cohen just being crazy Cohen, as per usual, which he obviously loves to do. And I'm a big fan of, like, the stuff and Cue the Winged Serpent and all of his weird shit. So reviews of all 3 of those are on the channel. But this is my first time doing a proper review of the book. And upon getting reacquainted with it, I had forgotten how impressive this book was. I said for years and years before I read the Tower books properly that Salem's Lot was in my top 5. And when we did the recent tier ranking, I moved it from an S tier down to an A tier. And in some ways, I'm regretful of that, because upon getting reacquainted with this book, especially some of the passages, the observations about the nature of fear, about just trying to make your mind disbelieve what you're seeing and experiencing, and just also the observations about just small town life and the secrets that they keep and stuff like that. I've got 4 fatty ass pages of notes, and obviously, as I said in the pre-gaming proper before we started the show, if you have any particular beats in the book, lines, passages, whatever the hell it may be, please toss them out accordingly. So just to give some of the statistics of this book, as I always like to start out with, this came out October 17th of 1975, which is why it was our October book of the month 45 years ago. It's nuts, man. And then there was the miniseries that Tobe Hooper did that I mentioned, which went from November 17th through the 24th of 1979. It was made for TV, but it still really pushed a lot of boundaries. And it's a very, despite feeling a little bit dated, especially in the appearance of certain things, it's a very eerie and spooky book, especially from the altered, more Nosferatu type of look that they went for Barlow, as well as like, I mean, the scene with Glick floating up to the window traumatized me like a mofo as a little kid, as I'm sure it did with many, many others. And I think the acting is solid all across. And then June 20th through 21st, there was the Tnt Miniseries that I mentioned very briefly, and I will continue to mention it very briefly because, yes, it is another turn of the wheel. It changes Callahan's motivations, which just blew my mind. Shout out to Mike's book reviews. He does exceptional Stephen King coverage, if you guys weren't familiar, all kinds of other cool sci-fi fantasy sort of things as well. But he had a similar problem with just the altered intentions, I guess, without getting into too much detail about that. But then another interesting thing is that there was also a 7-part BBC radio series that was done in the early 2000s, and it was never released on like CD or anything like that, and you can't find it at least properly digitally. But I did a little bit of searching on the interwebs, and I found it. And I'm going to put a link to it after this in the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. If you guys aren't familiar, there's a Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. We have almost 1,000 members right now, so it's not like tens of thousands like some of the other big boys, but terrific palaver with an awesome Ka-Tet of people, and we keep it as respectful and insightful as possible. So I'll make sure to throw a link to that so that I might even do a review of that at some particular point. I mean, shit, I've done everything else Salem's Lot at this point. And another bit of info in case you weren't aware, there is, in fact, a new film that is in development courtesy of James Wan. And unfortunately, Gary Dauberman, who scripted It Chapter 2, he also did The Nun. He's a longtime protege of James Wan's, but I'm just not particularly fond of him. I did like It Chapter 2, though, despite some of the issues with like the puking scene and some of the silliness and whatnot. So I don't know, maybe with working from pre-existing material, he can do a better job. And this is also going to be the first time that we see, at least presumably, a R-rated theatrical, very cinematic version of Salem's Lot. And that's not to discredit the Tobe Hooper one, but it was still made for TV, and it was a little defanged and declawed, so to speak. Now that I think about it, I should have worn my friggin' fangs for this, but, you know, I always talk with a lisp anytime I've got those in. And also, lastly, before we move on, Castle Rock Season 2, which unfortunately Castle Rock was recently canceled. I'm not surprised, you know, with the Overlook series moving along at HBO Max. So J.J. Abrams, he took those resources for a third season and kind of flipped them, especially with the poor reception of it. I thought the second season was improved, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because Jerusalem's Lot plays a part on this weird other level of the tower where we have this young Annie Wilkes coming to Castle Rock and having some stuff go down with the construction that's happening with the Somalian refugees and all that stuff. And man, Castle Rock Season 2 was kind of a mess with the exception of a great performance by Tim Robbins and then obviously a killer, just knockout, amazing turn as a young Annie Wilkes by Lizzie Kaplan. But really, aside from that, they didn't really do much interesting stuff with Jerusalem's Lot like they could have, at least in my personal estimation. So that is all of the background information before we jump into this. We all know that this was a tribute to Dracula, and basically that Sai King, he was teaching this English class, I believe it was a high school English class, at this private academy, and one of the bits of assigned reading was Dracula. And so despite the fact that he loved it as a kid, said that he read it in this audio introduction, so the audiobook has a like 15-minute introduction by Stephen King, which is pretty rad. And so he gives some insight about the creative process of it and the fact that it was assigned reading. He got reacquainted with it, and he was like, I wonder what would happen if Dracula suddenly showed up in New York City. And Tabby was funny. She was like, well, I'm pretty sure he would like get run over by a goddamn taxi or something like that. And they're just like, you know, that's silly. Why would I even pursue this idea? But then he kind of twisted it a little bit, and he was like, okay, what would happen if he landed in a small town where he would be less noticed, he could be more secretive, and the fact that he implements this whole small towns hide their secrets sort of thing, it made a lot more sense to King. And he even talks about the fact that the Danny Glick scene was based on a nightmare that he had when he was very, very young, and he saw himself like hanging from something. So, I mean, it's a very fascinating, creative process about all of this. And the audiobook is terrifically read by Ron McClarty. But we would also be remiss if I didn't mention a little bit about the fact that Chapelwaite is a TV series that ties in with Jerusalem's Lot, the Lot, as we like to say. What is it? Charles Boone, I believe, is the name of the character from that pseudo prequel that Adrian Brody is going to be playing. It's going to be on Epix. I'm very stoked about that. And pretty much everything else. It was nominated for a 1976 World Fantasy Award, a Locus Award for Best All-Time Fantasy in 1987. This is less fantasy for me, so that's probably why it didn't win. This is definitely a straight-up horror book, and a gothic horror at that. With the Jerusalem's Lot stuff, it definitely pulled more so from Lovecraft, whereas this one pulls so much more from Stoker. I mean, characters like Ben Mears at one particular point late in the book even quotes Dracula. So, guys, I'm going to catch up on what all of you are saying so far. We've got 19 in the chat. Anytime I see 19 peeps watching this, it warms my heart. So let's see what everybody else is saying. And please, as I mentioned, give your thoughts on the book, everybody. I'd love to hear your insights. Okay, Austin chimes in and says, Jerusalem's Lot was written beautifully. I love the story being told through letters like Bram Stoker's Dracula. Yeah, he most definitely took that inspiration from that. And it's a framing device that I always found really cool. And on a short that I'm working on that's been kind of bouncing back and forth throughout the pandemic with it, I'm trying to implement a similar sort of thing, except it's with emails as opposed to written letters based on the time that I have it taking place in. So, Horror Head Heather, that is one of our most rad status Patreon supporters. Heather Briley, what is up, yo? So very happy to have you in here for however long you can stay. Travis Miller, did my first read and watch the miniseries earlier this week. I love the details he packs in with all of the side stories. Feels like a book of shorts. Yeah, it most definitely does. And there's I'm going to briefly breeze through the supporting characters here in a little bit, but there is a shit ton of them. And granted, some of them aren't as developed as others, but they all still feel like real people. It shows that King lived the small town life and observed a lot. And I think that's what some of the best writers do, is they observe, because that's what really helps them flesh out more multidimensional, believable people instead of these like boring one-note caricatures of crap. So there you go. What else we got? Nap19 says, I will never look at an ice cream scooper the same again because of Castle Rock Season 2. Yeah, Castle Rock Season 2, there's a couple interesting scenes of gore. I will definitely give them that. So, Lizzie Kaplan, badass gangsta bitch, man. Ben is awesome, and Mark, referring to Mark Petrie. And it's interesting because, we do have a Ka-Tet that forms here in Stephen King's second novel, a Ka-Tet that consists of a English teacher, a doctor, a writer. We have a younger girl, and then obviously we have a younger boy in Mark Petrie. So, I mean, yeah, we've got that. It's very fascinating to me because, by the time we get to book 5, we do have a Ka-Tet that is an older man, that is a more middle, younger, older guy, who knows how old Roland is, But and then with Eddie Dean, so we have a younger guy, which presumably would be our doctor, and then we've got a kid. I mean, it's very interesting how King, dare I say, kind of recycles framework a little bit. And I did mention in the pregame that all of the hidden aspects of the town, King and all of its large cast of characters, King has revisited this countless times. I would say probably more so in, huge cast of characters in something like The Stand makes sense because it's a sprawling over an entire country sort of thing. But I would say really the two best examples, even more so than it, are probably Needful Things and Under the Dome. That's where I can really just see the similarities with the groundwork of exploring all of these different little side stories and rivalries and, whether it's, cheating and, resentments and, people being good at their jobs, bad at their jobs, whatever the hell it may be. Lawrence, the real estate guy, and his underhanded work. Like, there is just so much development of all of these different people that even if you're not necessarily a big fan of them, they still captivate and intrigue you, which is pretty cool. So Comfort Doll says, "Hail to our king." Amen to that. Austin's retracting some messages, so I'm not sure what's going down there. I like the concept of Needful Things. So yeah, I mean, Needful Things isn't like a top 20 for me, but it's still rather fascinating. Although I reread and then rewatched just a couple days ago before Halloween, Something Wicked This Way Comes. And I'm like, oh, I see King borrowing from one of his heroes, Mr. Bradbury there. But then again, I mean, wasn't King kind of borrowing and sending up and kind of, I mean, this is an homage to Dracula, as we said a little bit earlier. Austin says, this is an example of King writing a novel with many characters that are still interesting. Yes, good call. Sleeping Beauties is another one that I didn't mention, but I'm kind of with you that Dome and Beauties both felt a little bit flat. But let's get into some of my favorite passages in this book as we just kind of roll through a little bit further. So early on in the book, and that's the thing. So one kind of approach King does here, and he's unfortunately notorious for it, is that he kind of starts the story near the end. So we've got Mark and Ben, and they are out of the lot, and they're like basically on the run and then down in Mexico and so on and so forth. And King basically spells out that certain characters that we get acquainted with later in the book, they don't make it, or they disappear or whatever. And I kind of don't like that he does that, but he's obviously fond of that sort of approach. So, I mean, I don't know, whatever. That's his prerogative. But yeah, you do find out that certain characters aren't around in this later bit, and then it like does the whole flashback sort of thing. But I did want to at least mention, oh, and also, just to give a little bit further look at this book, and that's the thing. You see my copy of Lot behind me. This is like a copy that I hate, like to even take out, which I did to look at some of the essays and stuff like that. But when you have something like this collectible, and I'm sure the various peeps in the Ka-Tet would definitely understand in this regard just how, I mean, handling this sort of stuff with a fine-tooth comb. There is this really dope, as I try to be so gentle with this, there's this really dope map of the town that Glenn Chadbourne did. I mean, all of the detail, all of the different landmarks and homes and stuff like that. It's really, really sweet. And that is something like, geez, even having this out, I'm like all nervous and stuff. It's kind of silly on my part. But so this is like the section that really kind of kicks things off intriguingly, which I really dig. So it says, Ghost Town in Maine by John Lewis. Jerusalem's Lot is a small town east of Cumberland and 20 miles north of Portland. It is not the first town in American history to just dry up and blow away, and will probably not be the last, but it is one of the strangest. Ghost towns are common in the American Southwest, where communities grew up almost overnight around rich gold and silver lodges and then disappeared almost as rapidly when the veins of ore plied out, leaving empty stores and hotels and saloons to root emptily in desert silence. In New England, the only counterpart to the mysterious emptying of Salem's Lot is a small town in Vermont called Mommsen. And so it's basically like a Roanoke sort of situation in Mommsen, because in 1923, this community in Vermont, like everybody disappeared, like bing, bang, boom, gone. And so there is the connotation that a similar thing happened with the lot. And this reporter is doing this investigation and so on and so forth. And he's just trying to find some answers and not necessarily succeeding. Like the people who got out of the lot before everybody else disappeared, they remain very mime about it, most notably the constable. And yeah, he's just like, I just knew it was time to get out. And a couple business owners that pieced out and so on and so forth. But yeah, so we find out at the beginning of the story that the whole town pretty much disappeared. So foreshadowing, I guess you could justify it as that. It's one of the few things as far as the framing of this that I know people are fond of it, whether it's film or whether it's in the written form or whatever. But it's like, now let's flash back and tell you what really happened and so on. I don't know, not the biggest fan of that, but hey, art is subjective, to each their own. But this passage I found really interesting, where King basically says, in all small towns, scandal is always simmering on the back burner. And that's like what I told you, the married woman diddling the younger guy and the retribution of the husband, or, Lawrence the real estate guy and some of his nefarious business practices and stuff like that. And even more so, King continues, time went on a different schedule there. Nothing too nasty could happen in such a nice little town. not there. More foreshadow. So yeah, I mean, hey, we all know it's going to be there. It is what it is in that regard. But I must say, convenient scripting by Steve, where, Ben Mears, who is plagued as he is getting back to this town that he only lived in for 4 years, but had such it really was an iconic and like life-defining 4 years for him, especially with the scare that he got in this old ghost house, this Marston house. It's just very convenient writing that he happens to be there and he's struggling with the recent loss of his wife in this accident and so on and so forth. And yet he's in this park, and lo and behold, this little cutie, Susan Norton, who's, from what I gauged, like about half his age, and once again, King loves writing that, although King was in his 20s when he wrote this, so I don't know. But nonetheless, she just happens to be reading a copy of Air Dance, one of Ben Mears' books, as he's in the park. So just very, very conveniently, you've got this little hottie. She's reading your book. She's a fan. And, of course, the romance blossoms from there. And I don't know. She's already involved with this guy, this Floyd Tibbets dude. And yet she's just like, screw that guy. I've got this celebrity author that I can get down with now. And yet, yes, Floyd is an asshole, as we find out, especially later on and stuff. But I feel like as somebody who's, had a lady just kind of drop him with little to no explanation when I was a lot younger in my early 20s. It's rough, man, and it'll make people do shitty things sometimes. And so, I don't know. That's another thing where I'm just like, I feel like it shows very early on that maybe Susan Norton's character isn't like crystal clean, pristine sort of stuff. And then a couple choices she makes later in the book that kind of seal her fate to a degree, but I'll get to those a little bit later. Small towns, and this is another interesting bit, small towns have long memories and pass their horrors down ceremonially from generation to generation. And that's the fact that horrible stuff, and this is like, they're making the connotation with the Marston the Marston house that scarred Ben Mears so bad as a child, when he, on a dare, went inside and saw Huey Marston, obviously, Dirk Hubie Marston to be specific, but, this is a guy who killed his wife, himself, and then booby-trapped the entire house. I mean, they didn't even find out that him and his wife were dead until, like, the delivery, the mailman, he caught this nasty odor. And they'd apparently been dead for, like, 3 or 4 days. But when he brought, like, the search crew in, the whole place was, like, booby-trapped with, like tons of newspapers to fall and crush somebody and all this different wacky shizzle. It's really kind of fascinating in that regard, but it's stories like that, the town, these small towns especially, the fact that they pass their horrors from generation to generation, and even if you weren't there to experience it, the tale, it is told to the younger people, and it lives on, like the tale lives on through the passing of it, to the posterity in that regard, which I find very fascinating. And then you find that, you find out some really nasty stuff about this Hubie Marston and his wife, about the fact that she implored him to kill her, the fact that they were apparently, they were allegedly sacrificing young children, the fact that they had ties with people in Europe and the demonic stuff. And this is where the story kind of ties in with the Jerusalem's Lot prequel story, which is fascinating. So yeah, some great passages there. And I'm going to take another look real quick as I saw Austin threw in a super chat. Don't want to neglect you, good sir. Austin says, I think the quote that defines the book is small towns have long memories and past. Oh, interesting. We think alike, this, which is good. Comfort Doll says, I believe that Lot was the first Stephen King movie I ever saw, but Carrie was the first book. Well, I'm trying to remember I don't think Carrie had actually come out just yet, or maybe, yes, actually Carrie was 70. I can't remember offhand. I'm supposed to be a pseudo enthusiast, maybe expert sometimes at that sort of thing. But I know that King started writing Salem's Lot before Carrie was published. And so some food for thought there. First book I read, even my dad said King was my spiritual father. That's awesome. Damn, you beat me to the quote. Austin, I'm sorry, man. Okay, Austin's throwing out another one. The town cares for devil's work no more than it cares for God's or man's. It knew darkness, and the darkness was enough. Yeah, and it's those sort of passages that really give me a vibe similar to some parts from Pet Sematary. If I'm going to be fair about it, and just some of the nastiness that we experience in there. So now to just run through this crazy cast of characters. I already kind of went through the Ka-Tet of peeps, but king in all of his just, developing of peeps. I mean, we hear about, the milkers and the kid who wants to drop out of school and the delivery drivers who, actually bring that out. And then we meet Ava Miller and her epic breakfast of 4 eggs, 8 pieces of bacon, and, bread and coffee and juice and all this other stuff, who takes care of the place that, Ben Mears actually ends up staying at when he can't rent the Marston house because there's already 2 people who have purchased it. And then the McDougal family and the sad case of Sandy, this 17-year-old wedded mother who's abusing her poor little child, Randy, like beating up her baby. She is a sick bitch, and yet she is presumably a byproduct of this horrible marriage that she's in, dropping out of high school, marrying this guy, Royce, and so that's bad. And then you've got the local law, which is like the constable and deputy, and, Nolly and Perkins Gillespie, respectively. And then even the development of, like, Mike Ryerson, the gravedigger guy, who discovers that dead dog at the very beginning. That kind of is the start of this cycle of this evil starting to come there. And then you've got even the asshole bus driver, Charlie Rhodes, and boy, does he have one of the most cinematic and awesome demises of anybody in this book. And this is a spoiler review, everybody. And then you've got the drunk who lives at Eva Miller's, who's like diddling her from time to time since her husband is dead, which is Ed Weasel Craig. He's an interesting character. Richie Bodden, even, this grade school bully who, when we first meet Mark Petrie, this big bully comes to mess with our main kid. And like the kid, he fights dirty, but he still beats down the bully. And Mark Petrie, I mean, the fact that he's a kid obsessed with horror and all that stuff, I mean, it's pretty great, man. Also, who else we got? Got Dud Rogers, who is the resident dump keeper and rat killer aficionado. He basically becomes kind of like an Igor of sorts. He's described as having the hunchback and all that, which is interesting. And then Lawrence Crockett, who is our crooked real estate agent guy, the dude who sets up this kind of off-the-books deal with Straker and Barlow to purchase the property because of the fact that they're going to cut him in on this big development investment. So he's a schmuck. What else we got? Obviously, I mentioned Straker and Barlow, like Straker being the familiar. If you've watched, I love What We Do in the Shadows so goddamn much, everybody, and just the Guillermo, the virgins, they're so sad. I love that show. So Straker is the familiar of Barlow, who is our ancient European vampire. We don't even necessarily ever find out how old he is, but we know he is like hundreds of years old, if not much, much more so. And then Bonnie Sawyer, who's getting her afternoon delight. She's the former beauty queen who is cheating on her husband and stuff. Matt Burke, who becomes a part of our aforementioned Ka-Tet. He's the English teacher who, it's interesting because in the Salem's Lot miniseries, he was a former teacher of Ben Mears. That's not the case here. They just strike up a really cool, almost like father-son sort of friendship. But Burke is on the verge of retirement. He's involved in local, like plays and what's the word that I'm looking for? It's totally eluding me at the particular moment, but it doesn't matter. And then Floyd Tibbetts, who is the on and off lover of Susan that we mentioned, a frequenter of Dell's, which is the bar, and then Ralphie and Danny Glick, who basically are the first human victims. They're walking over to hang out with Mark Petrie and see all of this cool shit, and lo and behold, that is where Barlow first strikes, although we don't necessarily know what it is early on in the book, but it was marketed as a vampire book and an homage to Dracula, so everybody knows that was the case. And, Ralphie, the younger brother, disappears, and then there's this blood sacrifice, presumably of him, and then Danny Glick eventually shows back up after, going to the hospital. You think it's like anemia, and they check they do all these different tests on him. And that funeral scene, I have to say, it basically rivals the one in Pet Sematary for Gage because of the fact that Danny Glick's father, he freaks out and he's like screaming at his son to wake up and to be okay and to stop playing and all this different stuff. And he makes this, it's a scene of a different variety compared to the funeral of Gage, but damn, is it engaging and just so heartbreakingly sad, man. It is legit in that regard. And then you've got Mabel Wirtz, who's like the town gossip, who's like sitting and, with the binoculars looking at everybody all the damn time and stuff. And so that's kind of funny. And then we obviously mentioned Barlow. And so there's other people who are mentioned like very, very passingly. But for the most part, that is a super extensive cast of characters. Thankfully, it's not a cast of characters anywhere near as big as Under the Dome, where King basically in the deluxe edition of Under the Dome, he had these little playing cards. So you could, like, I think I rattled off like what, maybe a dozen or so people right here. But King had like a full deck of cards of all of those characters in Under the Dome. It's kind of overkill in my estimation. It's a lot to keep track of. And yet, even though there's a lot of characters here, once again, they're all defined very well. And similar to In the Stand, I at least was interested in what would happen with them. And I mean, I didn't like have some connection or affinity for every one of them, but they were all just interesting enough. And I was like, oh, they've been introduced. So are they going to get killed? Are they going to be a crucial part of the story? And obviously some weren't. But yeah, let's see what everybody else is saying in the chizats. Okay. Levis, Jika, I hope I'm not effing that up. Would it be better if you read Jerusalem's Lot from Night Shift before going into Salem's Lot, the novel? Honestly, I would say, since it was written after, I would say yes. But although he did start it and he had it as a different name beforehand, I mean, I don't know. I guess it would add an additional ominousness to the town, and it would make some of the stuff that Hugh B. Marston was doing make a little bit more sense. But I mean, here in the Cemetery Dance version, it is put in the back of the book, and King had constant consultation about this. So yeah, I would say it's kind of that thing where, you know, you have a story told like a trilogy told front to back, and then, you know, you go back and you get like a prequel sort of thing. And yes, I'm not. I know a lot of people hate the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, but I love the Clone Wars, and I have grown to appreciate aspects of Revenge of the Sith and stuff like that. So I would say yes. I'd say hold off, because it's almost like when King did 4.5 in the Dark Tower books, you know, where you had this amazing 7-book journey, and then you jumped backwards, and you had this just very intriguing and in a lot of ways distinctively different tale. Even the language, as was mentioned earlier here in the chat, King wrote Jerusalem's Lot so differently. He wrote it as a one, whereas this is like an homage, obviously, to Dracula. That was like straight up him going full out in the terminology, in the linguistics and the language and everything, the prose itself and the way that it's delivered, the actual framing of the letters and all that stuff. So I would say hold off. I'd say wait, and just you have this cool little prequel and sequel bit in the short stories. So that's at least what I would contend. But it's not really going to damage too much if you read it before. You will at least understand the hideous history of the town a little bit more so if you take it in that regard. So Zach King says, yep, the stuff with Sandy and the bus driver was what really got me. Jacob, dude, what is going, man? What is going? Happy to see you here. Hope all is well across the pond. Shit's been crazy here in the States, as I'm sure you have seen. So, yeah, interesting. I missed the start. What's up, Fuego? Hope things are good with you, my man. Love me some Salem's Lot, top 10 King for me. And, yeah, that's, as I mentioned earlier, this, boy, when I did the tier list, I didn't say it was an S. I said that it used to be, and then it shifted to an A. When we do that live version, which is going to be sometime this month, I think it's going to be the weekend of the 22nd through the 24th, so the weekend before Thanksgiving, but it's not 100% set in stone yet. But yes, this month we are doing the live tier list, the 6th part, which is going to complete the proceedings there. It's going to be covering the novella collections, like, you know, 4 Past Midnight, different seasons, stuff like that. And then also all of the short story collections, like Just After Sunset, Night Shift, so on and so forth. So I might have to be like Cecil, dude. We got to shift from an A to an S, Salem's Lot. So it was really great getting reacquainted with it, and so stoked that you're here for however long you can stay, my dude. Okay, Comfort Doll says, I think it's part of the appeal of most books. There's usually a few characters just like someone we know in real life. And yeah, relatability is a big thing. When you can put yourself in that person's shoes, or at least even if they're nothing like you, but you can still like kind of see their perspective. That's some of the best creativity as far as storytelling goes, whether it's on screen or whether it's in prose. And there really is something where I think you can step into the mind of a character so much more so in a book than you can in a film. And that's just because you go inside of their head. You can hear their internal thoughts, that sort of internal monologue and stuff like that. And that's what really makes reading so much more enriching at times. As much as I love visual storytelling, don't get me wrong. I mean, that's primarily what I review on both the Horror Show and my personal channel is visual storytelling, TV, movies, even comic books, you know. But there's something about novels and just being able to step into a character's shoes and just relate, as I said. So, Mark Pearson, I'm so glad you're getting through here, man. What is going? And yes, another one of my homies from across the pond. Hope you and the fam are doing well, Mark. Okay, Sharon Beveridge is here. Long days and pleasant nights to all. All work, so I'll watch this later. Well, that's why I'm stoked that we can have the peeps hanging right now, giving their thoughts in the live chat. But obviously, if you come to this video after the fact, please, comment and just leave your thoughts on this book. One of Stephen King's absolute best, a gothic treasure of terrors. Okay. Juggler Assassin says, haven't read this one yet. I want to hear more about Father Callahan and the different level of vampires after reading the Dark Tower books. Can't wait to start this one after Carrie. Damn, that's reverse order, but awesome. And that's another thing that I mentioned, and I was waiting until later in the book, but Father Callahan and my secret identity, guys, last name is Callahan. Oh, boy. But, yeah, that's a character, a namesake character is kind of cool in that regard. And so, yeah, intriguing there. And I love how that story is continued in Dark Tower 5 and 6 and so on. And so, okay. Luis Almodovar, greetings to all of the great staff members. It brings us great show to life. Love this book and the first television version. Amen to that. The Tobe Hooper version is great. Despite its alterations and condensation, I think it's a terrific adaptation. So looking forward to the live tier list. Yeah, Mark, it's going to be sometime. I think it's going to be the third weekend of November, if I'm not mistaken, because we have the Misery movie anniversary review, and then I also did the second season of the Mr. Mercedes television series. So those are a few things to look forward to. Dave Edmonds, evening all. That means Dave is on the other side of at least where I'm at, where it's like, what, 1:45. So yeah, stoked you're here, man. A pillar of the Hail to Stephen King Facebook group. Dave, what is up, sir? Austin chimes in again. The scene where a half dozen knives through the chest always gets me. Yeah, the doc, man. That's one thing that gets me as well. And the scene where Barlow kills Petrie's parents. Yeah, the head smash, bam! That is some intense shit, man. The fact that he didn't want to turn them, he wanted to just muck and mess with Mark's head so much more so, and he knew that by brutally killing his parents in front of him, as opposed to turning them, was just going to hurt him so much more. Some addictive shit, man. Like, seriously. Okay, where we at? Comfort Doll says, you nailed the reason why I will go back and reread a novel after seeing the movie from it. Yeah, and that's kind of what I prefer doing at this particular point. Like, and Mike Kearns from Mike's Book Reviews, who was on our Stephen King panel, Hail to Stephen King on Screen, that is available exclusively at phoenixfearcon.com through the end of the year. Yeah, Mike and I, and an awesome Ka-Tet that included Ledesma from the Stephen King podcast, my girl Sarah Wagstaff, who was on the Dark Tower panel with me previously, and Blue Gillen from Cemetery Dance. We all talked about the fact that, yeah, it's almost like the Cliff Notes in a lot of ways when you watch a good film, at least if it's from a novel. Like the Stephen King shorts are where they expand on things. The novels are where they have to condense things. It's unfortunate. It's nature of the beast. But that's why it's such an enriching experience when you watch a good adaptation and then you're like, shit, I want to go get the director's cut, which essentially is the book, you know? So, okay, since we've already been going for nearly an hour, if we were speaking of namesakes, I really enjoy mine. Oh, Zach, you said that before, man. Kurt's face-off with Donald was awesome. Yeah, it really is. And that's after the head bash scene and stuff. And that's one interesting thing they do with Barlow here that's drastically different, and I was going to mention it at one particular point here, but they have an awesome Nosferatu, like silent killer kind of look for Barlow in the miniseries, and it's awesome, it's iconic, I love it, and yet in the actual written form, Barlow is a suave, just very manipulative, eloquent, dare I say, sophisticated vampire. He is much more so like the Dracula that Stephen King was using as inspiration, especially when he is seen at the end in the coffin and he looks young and like suave and, you know, all that different stuff because he's presumably fed enough to like regenerate his appearance and everything. Whereas it's a much different sort of scare, you know, in the Tobe Hooper version. Dare I say, Rutger Hauer, at least in my estimation, in the 2004 version, looks more the part than at least as far as like, you know, the basis, the prose, the source material, than our Toby Hooper version. But I like them both, you know, different turns of the wheel, levels of the tower, all that different stuff. So I'm going to jump to one of my first favorite passages here. And you know what, before I do that, I'm going to set that to the side, take a drink of my coffee from my Gandalf goblet, and just show really quickly some of these dope illustrations that we have in this Cemetery Dance version. Shout out, obviously, to our peeps there. So this awesome illustration of the Marston house, beautifully painted, looks super, super sick. Then we have this next one with Ryerson, the gravedigger dude, looking up at the house. Just that it's when the creepiness is just starting to ensue. I'm assuming that's probably around the time that he found the dead dog and then had to go tell homeboy about it. This is another cool one. This is where Burke is first going up. He's going up those stairs because he knows Mike is quite possibly turned and a vampire in his upstairs, the dude that he tries to help out, his former student. There's some great beats in this book, man. So many great beats. Then we have this other one here, which I'm not 100%. You can definitely tell that is presumably Barlow, and he's about to go to Chowtown. My suspicion is that, I forget the name of the character because it only has a couple scenes, but I think that is the kid that, the younger guy that Bonnie Sawyer, I want to say her name is, basically the younger guy who was cheating with the older married woman. I'm assuming that's him. And there's an interesting confrontation where, you know, the husband shows up with the shotgun and stuff, and they combined his character with Lawrence, the shady, shady real estate guy, and they made it. They made Bonnie like the secretary, all this other stuff. That's fine. I mean, different level of tower, obviously. But I'm assuming that's him. But where he shows back up as a vampire, and you know, like Bonnie and her husband are there, and it's some good shit, man. Okay, as we jump a little bit further forward. Dun 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 dun. Sorry, I just want to make sure we get all of these. Then we've got Ben, and he is about to stake somebody. Anybody in the know, you definitely know who he is about to very begrudgingly put an end to. And it's a very sad scene, but it's an ending that has, like, it happened because of some illogical impetuousness from a certain character, which we will get into. But and then Father Callahan, he is about to have a legit confrontation right there, everybody. So all of these Hail to Stephen Kings go up for the Horror Show podcast as well. So I guess it's not going to help the audio listeners. Sorry, guys, when I'm showing that sort of stuff. But yeah, okay. So the bit that I wanted to read right here really quickly, page 137, the Lot 2. And so King has these passages called the Lot. So there's the Lot 1, the Lot 2, and the Lot 3. And that's where he's just like really describing the town in an intriguing fashion. And that's where he introduces like all the characters and gives them just their little side bits of information. And it's very similar, especially when we get to the Lot 3. And there's a particular passage where it's going over how all of these different characters meet their demise. It reminds me so much of the chapter in The Stand in the uncut version, where it basically tells how all of these different characters who were immune to Captain Trips but yet still died met their demise. And it's kind of a similar approach, and just the kind of jumping around very short little bits within the chapter. I dig the hell out of it. But okay, so page 137, 1. Oh goodness, you know what? Since the page numbers are different in this, sayonara, Cemetery Dance, as much as I love you, because my notes are in this beautiful edition. So sorry for the delay, everybody. But, okay, so yes, the beginning here, 137, okay, cool. So, here we go. Fall and spring came to Jerusalem's lot with the same suddenness of sunrise and sunset in the tropics. The line of demarcation could be as thin as one day. But spring is not the finest season in England. It's too short, too uncertain, too apt to turn savage on short notice. Even so, there are April days which linger in the memory, even after one has forgotten the wife's touch or the feel of the baby's toothless mouth at the nipple. But by mid-May, the sun rises out of the morning's haze with authority and potency. And standing on your top step at 7 in the morning with your dinner bucket in your hand, you know that the dew will be melted off the grass by 8, and that the dusk on the back roads will hang depthless and still in the air for 5 minutes after a car's passage. And that by 1 in the afternoon, it will be up to 995 on the 3rd floor of the mill, and sweat will roll off your arms like oil and stick your shirts to your back in a widening patch. And it might as well be July. Well, I'm feeling like a dirt because I think that is not the proper page that I was looking for. So, you know what? We move on. 3, okay. Yeah, that's right. Father Callahan is so much more defined in this, and I appreciate the absolute hell out of it, man. The fact that, yes, he is already shown to be this very devout religious man, but he has like kind of a skepticism about modern Catholicism and how they're trying to like appeal to, like New Age people and, less of the old world style and all that other stuff. But the fact that he had a friend in seminary pass him this, God grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, the tenacity to change what I may, and the good luck not to fuck up too often. This in Old English script with a rising sun in the background. Yeah, absolutely funny stuff. Yeah. But, okay. Crying was like pissing. Everything got in the way. Yeah, that's like Mark Petrie is a stone cold kid, even at a young age, man. Like he is toughened, and I appreciate the hell out of him. And another interesting dynamic that I found that I've forgotten about is how Ben Mears makes friends with Susan's father, but yet her mother is like a psycho face and just can't stand Ben and thinks his intentions are just nefarious and all that other stuff. But okay, another bit that I wanted to, as we're kind of nearing the finish line, get to. So this is in Susan's little bit here, 214, okay. Yes, and this is that scene that where Matt Burke is basically going up to possibly confront a vampire, and it's very, very captivating passage. King's prose in this, it just flows, and he has a different sort of like descriptiveness and eloquence. I mean, not to say that I dislike the current stuff. It's just interesting how his approach was drastically different in a lot of ways, at least in this early work. But going up the stairs was the hardest thing Matt Burke had ever done in his life. That was all. That was it. Nothing else even came close. Except perhaps one thing. As a boy of 8, he had been in a Cub Scout pack. The den mother's house was a mile up the road, and going was fine. Yes, excellent, because you walked in the late afternoon daylight. A coming home twilight had begun to fall, freeing the shadows to yawn across the road in long, twisty patterns. Or if the meeting was particularly enthusiastic and ran late, you had to walk home in the dark, alone. Alone, yes, that's the key word, the most awful word in the English tongue. Murder doesn't hold a candle to it, and hell is only a poor synonym. There was a ruined church along the way, an old Methodist meeting house which reared its shambles at the far end of a frost-heaved and hummock lawn. And when you walked past the view of its glaring, senseless windows, your footsteps became very loud in your ears, and whatever you had been whistling died on your lips. And you thought about how it must be inside, the overturned pews, the rotting hymnals, the crumbling altar, where only mice now kept the Sabbath. And you wondered what might be in there besides mice. What madmen, what monsters. Maybe they were peering out at you with yellow reptilian eyes. And maybe one night, watching would not be enough. Maybe some night, that splintered, crazily hung door would be thrown open, and what you saw standing there would drive you to lunacy at one look. And you couldn't explain that to your mother and father, who were creatures of the light, no more than you could explain to them how at the age of 3, the spare blanket at the foot of the crib turned into a collection of snakes that lay staring at you with flat and lidless eyes. No child ever conquers those fears, he thought. If a fear cannot be articulated, it can't be conquered. And the fears locked in small brains are much too large to pass through the orifice of the mouth. Sooner or later, you found someone to walk past all the deserted meeting houses you had to pass between grinning babyhood and grunting senility. Until tonight. Until tonight, when you found out that none of the old fears had been staked, only tucked away in their tiny child-sized coffins with a wild rose on top. I love that stuff, man. And King just describes the nature of fear and disbelief so good. And it's definitely in this book that I find so many similarities, at least as far as encountering something that is so irrational and so unbelievable that people either disregard or they segue into madness. That shit is fascinating to me. And it's in this book and Pet Sematary, I think, in a lot of ways especially, that King explores that in such a fascinating fashion. Okay. Okay, yep, the town knew about darkness. That Austin already beat me to that little bit, so mad respect there. Interesting about how there is that 51 fire, and then you find out that, like, as you peel back all of those layers about, who actually burned down the town in 51, about what the Marstons were actually doing. I mean, it's gross, it's creepy, it's strange. Danny Glick's mother dreaming of him coming and suckling at her teat when he's drinking her blood. That shit is messed up. And then obviously we have the first appearance of he thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghosts, which is what Mark Petrie starts saying when Danny Glick is right up there at his window and just beckoning and imploring to be invited in. That is good shit, man. And yet, yeah, and this is where Mark is about to really take his hero turn. And yes, I've already mentioned the outlandish impetuousness of Susan Norton going to this potentially dangerous home alone, and the fact that she's like, both of these guys are crazy, man. Like, what is Mr. Burke and Ben? Like, what are these two thinking? And then they eventually, obviously, get Jimmy the doctor, to team up with them and stuff. But I mean, yeah, she is in disbelief and she wants to prove them wrong. And maybe because of the fight with her mother, she's just much more adamant about just doing this like sort of independent thing. But she ends up going in with Mark Petrie, and everyone who's read this book knows the shit that goes down when she ends up at Marston House and how she gets turned, and she comes to Mark's window at night and is like imploring him to join them and all this other stuff. It's some intense stuff, man. But okay, as we continue along, Dr. Jimmy, who becomes a very interesting character. One of my favorite beats in this is where they go to look at Mama Glick, and she basically arises right there in the autopsy room, and she bites Jimmy, and yet he gives himself the tetanus shot and somehow is able to avert the turn. I find that to be like an interesting kind of altering of the of the mythology, because King does put his own spin on this. Like, whereas we all know Barlow is eventually killed, but it's not like that old vampire adage where you kill the master and everybody else goes back to normal. Fuck no! That is not the case in Salem's Lot. That's why we have a story like One for the Road. That's why we even have a weird movie like Return to Salem's Lot by Larry Cohen, Okay. God. There was, like, rereading something, you re-notice, like, little bits and pieces here and there that had probably just lost themselves to the sands of time. One of which being where Mark Petrie is with Susan in the Marston house, and he picks up this weird, like, old European, probably the same sort of, like, druidic, like, ancient shit that Charles Boone's ancestors were, just trying the whatever of the Mysteries of the Worm, I think was what it was called. But Petrie picks up this book, and he looks at it, and there's like a naked man holding a child's gutted body in this book. And it's that sort of like hideous, horrifying shit, man, that is just, it's incredibly tough to tussle with. It really, really is. And okay, so there's another passage real quick. And after I read this passage from page 307, I'm going to jump back to the chat because we are nearing the finish line as far as the potential of time. But okay, yeah. So this is some Father Callahan stuff, and once again, he's unfortunately underdeveloped, I think, in both of the adaptations, and that's why it's so great that we get to get reacquainted with him and see what happened to him in Dark Tower 5 and 6 and such. So okay. On the same Sunday evening, Father Callahan stepped hesitantly into Matt Burke's hospital room at 6:45 by Matt's watch. The bedside table and the counterpane itself were littered with books, some of them dusty with age. Matt had called Loretta Starcher at her spinster's apartment and had not only gotten her to open the library on Sunday, but had gotten her to deliver the books in person. She had come in at the head of a procession made up of 3 hospital orderlies, each loaded. She had left in something of a huff because he refused to answer questions. Oh, paragraph 2 is where I was supposed to start. Jerks. Okay, here we go. Father Callahan regarded the school teacher curiously. He looked worn, but not so worn or wearily shocked as most of the parishioners he visited in similar circumstances. Callahan found that the common first reaction to news of cancer, strokes, heart attacks, or the failure of some major organ was one of betrayal. The patient was astounded to find that such a close and up to now at least, fully understood friend as one's own body could be so sluggard as to lie down on the job. The reaction which followed close on the heels of the first was the thought that a friend who had let one down so cruelly was not worth having. The conclusion that followed these reactions was that it didn't matter if this friend was worth having or not. One could not refuse to speak to one's traitorous body or to get up a petition against it, or pretend that one was not at home when it called. The final thought in this hospital bed train of reasoning was the hideous possibility that one's body might not be a friend at all, but an enemy, implacably dedicated to destroying the superior force that had used it and abused it ever since the disease of reason set in. And so just as a preacher, as a priest, whatever, if you're going to constantly visit people who are dying, I mean, that's got to be a really shitty job, but yet one that is wrought with so much to observe and to process. And I feel like just the sadness of our bodies decaying and dying on us and basically giving out this friend that's been with us since the beginning, just saying, peace out, sort of thing. Boy, I mean, even with faith, I don't see how cynicism couldn't set in. But, I mean, that's some heavy, heavy shit, and I love that passage. It just, it gets me every time because it's just so intense in that regard, because I've seen loved ones waste away, and it's just, it gives a very painful perspective, I guess, you know. So let's jump back into the chat because I saw it moving with a little bit more vigorous force than before, and I think it was more so like in talking than anything else, but let's just double check as we are nearing the finish here. Okay, it's between this or The Stand from my favorite novel, says Dave Edmonds. Were you aware that Rutger Hauer is who Anne Rice pictured in her mind when she created the character of Stop? Well, I mean, back when Rutger was young, yeah, I can definitely see that. He's one handsome dude. Even when he was about to die, man, I mean, he aged well. I mean, it's happened with certain dudes like the Clint Eastwoods and the Robert Redfords of the world. I mean, the Kevin Costners. I mean, these are dudes who still, I mean, look pretty damn good in their own rights. I would love to see a Salem's Lot sequel written by King. One for the Road sets it up for a return for Ben and Mark. Yes, it most definitely does. Angus says, damn, I hate that I'm late, but really love this book. Fuego, yes, this book is the shiznittle bam, schnip, snap, schnip. Ghost Pirate Entertainment says, love the Salem's Lot story so much. I really hope the new movie is good. I've always wanted to see a modern, well-made, rated R version. Yeah, I'm in the same boat with you. All right, my homie Jacob says, I must say as well, One for the Road is excellent. One of my favorites from the night shift, having read Salem's Lot beforehand. Wasn't the town of Jerusalem's Lot mentioned in the Institute? If so, I totally spaced it. I know Salem's Lot was mentioned in Pet Sematary because when... oh goodness! Mrs. Creed, whose name is eluding me at the very moment. I keep thinking Ellie, but that's in any event. When Mrs. Creed is driving back to Ludlow, she drives past Salem's Lot. Thankfully, doesn't make the same mistake as the guy in One for the Road with deciding to drive through Salem's Lot, where in the midst of a snowstorm, because that shit does not end well for him. Barbara, they're coming to get you. I love Ben's memory of the hanged man in the Marston house. It always creeps me out. Damn right it does, man. Dave says, definitely that little girl wants a good night kiss. Chilling. Seriously. This book would have been 5 stars for me if it wasn't for all of the Lord's name in vain King had in this book. Well, I mean, if that hits you and it's like kind of a deal breaker, I definitely respect that, Angus. It's understandable. I have a tendency to scan thrift stores for copies of King's books. Comfort Doll, I do the same damn thing. That's where I got the predominance of this collection behind me. Angus says, when Mark's parents died, that was heartbreaking. Yep, the head smash. We talked about that a little while ago. That's a great passage, Fuego, sensational rating. Yeah, King's prose flowed in just a very, and even his use of language, I feel like when he was still teaching English, there is just something different and something, I mean, not that it got worse, it just changed, when he got out of the game of teaching and he could just be a full-time writer. So, okay, Dave says, how about that letter Barlow sends Mears? Yeah, I was originally thinking I wanted to read the full letter. I'm not sure if that's going to be a possibility at this particular point since we've already gone for over an hour and Cecil's like, try to keep those, not as insanely long as some of our other streams, which I respect. I mean, he's the showrunner, so shout out to my dude. Makes the letter Brady sent Hodges look like a party invitation. Damn right, man. And it's that sort of letter is where you get such a definingly, distinctively different Barlow than just this ominous figure like in the miniseries. I prefer this Barlow, who's more like a Count Dracula, with just being this sharp as attack or sharp as his fangs, sort of boo. Okay, I thought Susan may go the way of Mia and Dracula, not in King's World. Nope. And King was much more cynical in his earlier writings. That is for damn sure, man. Okay, just trying to cruise back to the beginning. Okay, so we're all caught up. Dope. Okay, so now we're kind of in the third act, and it is broken up into the three. So we've got the Marston House, we've got the Emperor of Ice Cream, and then we've got I think it's the Abandoned Village or the Deserted Village or something like that. Yes, the Deserted Village. Aha, got it. But yeah, so our Ka-Tet has basically decided it's time. Susan has already been lost. Yet they split up. And that's where we get the head bash and, Father Callahan getting bit and all of that nasty shit. Actually, he doesn't get bit. That's right. He's drinking Barlow's blood. And that's why he doesn't completely turn. And when we meet up with him in the Dark Tower, he's sick because he's not a vampire, but he's got the vampire blood in his body. Because, in the Dracula rules, you have to be bitten, but then you also have to drink their blood too. It's like that. It's not From Dusk Till Dawn where you're just bitten and then Rah! Sort of shit. Although I love From Dusk Till Dawn. It's my favorite vampire movie of all time for all its bombast and silliness and stuff like that. The fact that props to Petrie, man, for killing Straker, bashing that fool over the head, and yet Barlow and all of his nastiness as is revealed by the letter. I mean, the fact that he's pissed that Petrie killed him and then hung Straker upside down and drained him. It's a really, really messed up scene, man. Wonder had swallowed words. That's one of my favorite lines in the book. But let's at least look at as we're nearing the finish here. I have to at least read a passage from this letter because Barlow's letter is dope. The hell with it. Here we go. This is where they are hot on Barlow's trail. Straker is dead. We're less than 100 pages from the finish line. My dear young friends, how lovely of you to have stopped by. I am never averse to company. It has been one of my many great joys in a long and often lonely life. Had you come in the evening, I should have welcomed you in person with the greatest of pleasure. However, since I suspected you might choose to arrive during daylight hours, I thought it best to be out. I have left you a small token of my appreciation. Someone very near and dear to one of you is now in the place where I occupied my days until I decided that other quarters might be more congenial. She is very lovely, Mr. Mears, very toothsome, if I may be permitted a small bon mot. I have no further need of her, and so I have left her for you to, how is your idiom? To warm up for the main event? To whet your appetites if you like? Let us see how well you like the appetizer to the main course you contemplate. Shall we? Master Petrie, you have robbed me of the most faithful and resourceful servant I have ever known. You have caused me, in an indirect fashion, to take part in this ruination. Have caused my own appetites to betray me. You sneaked up behind him, doubtless. I am going to enjoy dealing with you. Your parents first, I think. Tonight, or tomorrow night, or the next. And then you. But you shall enter my church as choir boy Castretam. And Father Callahan, have they persuaded you to come? I thought so. I have observed you at some length since I arrived in Jerusalem's lot. Much as a good chess player will study the games of his opposition. Am I correct? The Catholic Church is not the oldest of my opponents, though. I was old when it was young, when its members hid in the catacombs of Rome and painted fishes on their chests so they could tell one from another. I was strong when the simpering club of bread eaters and wine drinkers who venerate the sheep savior was weak. My rights were old when the rights of your church were unconceived. Yet I do not underestimate. I am wise in the ways of goodness as well as those of evil. I am not jaded, and I will best you. How, you say? Does not Callahan bear the symbol of white? Does not Callahan move in the day as well as the night? Are there not charms and potions, both Christian and pagan, which my so good friend Matthew Burke has informed me and my compatriots of? Yes, and yes. But I have lived longer than you. I am crafty. I am not the serpent, but the father of serpents. Still, you say, this is not enough. And it is not. In the end, Father Callahan, you will undo yourself. Your faith in the white is weak and soft. Your talk of love is presumption. Only when you speak of the bottle are you informed. My good friends, Mr. Mears, Mr. Cody, Master Petrie, Father Callahan, enjoy your stay. The Medoc is excellent. Procured for me especially by the late owner of this house, whose personal company I was never able to enjoy. Please be my guest if you will. Have a taste for the wine after you have finished the work at hand. We will meet again in person, and I shall convey my felicitations to each of you at that time in a more personal way. Until then, adieu, Barlow. Dope shit, man. Dope. Oh, man. King was just firing on all cylinders here, and it's interesting for Barlow to mention the late owner of the house because, yeah, he was obviously, we're talking about Hugh Marston, he was into some ill shit, man. And, yes, so in the home stretch, as they're about to kill Susan and then getting ready for the final confrontation, which I must admit, I prefer the final confrontation that we get kind of condensed and combined in the miniseries, if I'm not mistaken, where it all goes down at the Marston's house as opposed to going to the smaller scale of it, whatever. But yeah, he quotes Dracula in this. Ben Mears thinks of the line where he's like, we must go through bitter waters before we reach the sweet. And then also, this is a King line, childhood horror and adult horror had merged. That's essentially where, like, the fears of your childhood becoming actual reality and manifesting themselves to you as an adult. I can't even fathom how frightening that could be. Now, granted, this is fantasy, or is it, right? But nonetheless, man, I mean, it's some very, very hefty stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's so powerful. I get chills even reading it, thinking about the Barlow. So yeah, a very different Barlow, a brash, an arrogant Barlow, which I dig. He's very much more so like Count Dracula. Before the head bashing, though, and this is just one thing I had to mention, where Father Callahan calls the Petrie household and talks to his parents, and he says, "Your son is with me. He's fine. I will have him home shortly. Goodbye." And they're like, "Why does a Catholic priest have our son?" Unfortunately, in the modern day and all of the horrible shit that we found out over the years, man, I mean, yeah, that's the intense stuff. And then the aforementioned half-turning of Callahan, where Barlow, he's like, I mean, it's very noble what Callahan does, obviously, but sacrificing himself for Mark is very dope. And, the fact that he's like, "Come, false priest, learn of a true religion. Take my communion." And then he drinks his blood and the sacrificial aspect of it. And then obviously Callahan rushes off to New York City, and we meet up with him again in the Dark Tower 5. But, I mean, just fascinating stuff. And then we get to the climax of the entire town being taken over as opposed to a person here, a person there, like the full-on like night basically happening. The bus driver getting eaten by all the kids. That is a very cinematic scene. That's like King writes incredibly cinematically in this book as far as like the construct of these particular beats and the way he describes them and frames them up. It's so goddamn good. Whether it's finding the McDougal family, all vampires in the crawl space. Yeah, goodness, it's so good. What else? Constable Parkins being a chicken shit and just ditching out. I mentioned a drastically different Barlow. I must admit, though, I don't like the chalk, the mystery of the chalk, and as certain characters are dying and trying to, get everybody to the fact that they condense it, as I said, and he's just in Eva Miller's like cellar and the fact that they're like, "Oh, he had chalk on his hand. We got to figure out where there's a pool table." And so I'm not a big fan of that. It just didn't really do it for me. Kill the master, save the others. Nope, as I mentioned earlier. Interesting hearing about the small character deaths, which we also mentioned. But I got one more little passage, and this is about 3 a.m. in this town that I found exceptionally awesome. And then we'll wrap it up, and I will announce the book of the month for November, which is going to be great, Joe. Okay. And this is from the Lot 4, which is our last like town-wide description of different things going down. So at 3 in the morning, the blood runs slow and thick, and slumber is heavy. The soul either sleeps in blessed ignorance of such an hour, or gazes about itself in utter despair. There's no middle ground. At 3 in the morning, the gaudy paint is off that old whore, the world, and she has no prose, no nose, and a glass eye. Gaiety becomes hollow and brittle, as in Poe's castle, surrounded by the Red Death. Horror is destroyed by boredom. Love is a dream. Yeah, King is wearing his gothic influences on his sleeve in this for damn sure, man. And it's interesting. After they stake Barlow, and it's just down to Mark and Ben. When they go back after fleeing the town and they see that all those other vampires are still alive, they come back the next day during the daytime and they go back to Eva Miller's place. And for whatever reason, even though he melted, and that's one thing King describes the hell out of just the decomposition of the vampires. Like, it's so fascinating, like grotesque and badass. But for whatever reason, Barlow's teeth are still there. And they're trying to chomp and stuff. It's like, and they just, cast them aside. It's super, super creepy. And then obviously we get to the epilogue, which is where, as we found out at the very beginning of the story, Mark and Ben have to head back. And they have to head back because they had been, Ben specifically, in between working on his book and stuff, he's been looking at the newspapers from the Portland Gazette, I think it is, and he sees that things are starting back up. So they're like, well, got to go back and finish what the 51 fire did not destroy. And they, to quote Harold and Kumar, Pookie, let's burn this motherfucker down. And that's exactly what they proceed to do. And it's it leaves things unfinished, though, because if you read One for the Road, you know that they destroyed most of the town and, there was no activity for a while. But in turn, it started back up again, which is where I still see so many people. They're like, we want a Salem's Lot sequel. The hell with Return to Salem's Lot and Larry Cohen, So I would love to see a sequel to that just as much as I would love to see I mean, there's a lot of books where we could go back, whether it's Firestarter or going back to Ludlow or and then the Graveyard for Pets or whatever, But I adore this book. It is going to be moved back into the S tier when we do the live stuff, the live final installment, and I cannot wait. So let's get everyone's final thoughts here, since we are at nearly 90 minutes and Cecil's going to wring my neck. But, Dave, thank you so much, man, for the super chats. They help us keep the lights on here, as I often say. And I love the movie from the 70s, says Justin Mason. Yeah, it's pretty damn good. Dave says, great live stream, Fuego. You take the King experience to another level. I appreciate the hell out of that, man. I just really, more so than anything, I'm humbled and honored to be sharing this palaver with all of you, as I often say and have to double down and mention every single time. Fuego is Barlow. Okay. Justin, that 70s movie is quality. Amen, everybody. Well, I have to extend a grande gracias, obviously, to everybody who decided to make a brief appearance here. Thanks to Austin and to Dave for sharing with the super chat stuff. And obviously, guys, if you are still in the chat and you haven't liked this video, it means a hell of a lot. It's another thing that helps with the analytics and the monetization aspects of this video. And if you haven't read Salem's Lot, if you've only done the film versions or whatever, whether it's the 79 or the 2004, do yourself a favor and check that out, as well as the 2 stories that are in Night Shift, which is Jerusalem's Lot, which is a pseudo prequel of sorts about Chapelwaite, and One for the Road, which is a direct little short story sequel. They're both really awesome. And now to announce the book of the month for November. It's a more recent release, King's most recent collection of short stories that is turning 5 years old. The Bizarre Bad Dreams. There's a lot of really awesome stuff in here. Various tales, Little Green God of Agony. Oh, there's a nice little inscription from my parents in here. Merry Christmas 2015. That is what is up. So, I mean, you've got Mile 81 is great in here. Morality, that's an interesting. Which is so good. That's some tower-connected stuff. Under the Weather is super sad. Little Green God of Agony. Drunken Fireworks is fun. Obits is really good. It's got kind of like a late edition sort of vibe to it. Summer Thunder is a heartbreaker. This is a terrific collection, and at the beginning of December, so the first Saturday of December, which, just to double down on the particular day, so December 5th is when we will be doing our next live installment of Hail to Stephen King, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Very much looking forward to having some more palaver with all of you. And yeah, everybody, I extend a grande gracias. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find moi on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on YouTube, where I also do have my own personal channel. If you want stuff that is like the non-scarific accord, it's called In Fuego-tainment. And I just did a review of the second episode of The Mandalorian, as well as like Borat subsequent movie film, Antebellum. I try to do at least a few videos a week over there, so it would mean a hell of a lot to go over there and subscribe and like, share, to check out some of the videos there. But obviously, the name of the game here is The Horror Show, and showing support here, it definitely means the world to us. And yes, this is every single Saturday, the weekly worship, as I like to call it. So I've been Fuego. Y'all have been Rad Status. Hail Ka-Tet. And until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, Cinemigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you for some of this palaver with you today. It meant a hell of a lot, but I'm hopeful we share more of it sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scared and read Stephen King. Check out for next month, Bizarre Adventures. All right, everyone. So very appreciative that you spent a little bit of your Saturday, or whatever time of day it may be. And yes, I show you yeah, that's right. Stephen King of the Hill. It's awesome. Love it. Love it. All right, guys. Much love.